Welcome to People I Know Show, a podcast about interesting people, personal growth, and being wrong. I'm your host, Kurt Karstensen. Joining me today is my longtime friend, Steph MacPhail. Having an episode with Steph was such a great reminder of why it's important and worthwhile, to me at least, to have this show. Last weekend, I visited her and her family at her home for what turned out to be about 8 hours. And that's longer than what I expected and longer than I'd spent time with them in many months or even a few years. And if I didn't have this show, would have I gone over there then? How long would have I stayed? I don't know. But for me, it's been worthwhile. And I can only hope that the conversations I'm having with these people are worthwhile for you as well. We covered many topics in this episode, including Steph being a mom, my memorable role in her wedding, her past career as a TV meteorologist, her current career in education, some science topics, anxiety, and being perfect, and how Steph was wrong about that. Are you listening on Apple Podcasts? If so, please leave a rating and a review. You can also leave a rating and review in most other places where you might be listening, and check out the photos and videos on the People I Know Show pages on Facebook and Instagram. Now, let's get to my conversation with Steph MacPhail. I'm joined today by Stephanie MacPhail. I call you Stephanie sometimes, but most people call you Steph, right?
I only say that you can call me Stephanie if you're my parents or I'm being yelled at.
Okay, Stephanie. Well, you're sitting here with one of your two young sons.
Yep.
We have Josh, who's going to be making normal baby noises because he's just over 6 months old.
That's correct.
So you've got the 6-month-old in your arms. Is that pretty common, I'd imagine, these days for you to have a child in your arms?
Yeah, and I think it's probably just as much of a comfort for him as it is for me.
So are you picturing the months and years ahead where you're not going to have a young child in your arms anymore? No,
and I think that Bryce, the older one, who's trying to get Dave to make macaroni and cheese right now, he still snuggles with me, but I know that someday that's going to go away. Mm-hmm. And this with Josh will go away too. And that'll be sad.
I'd hope, though, that you're focusing more on the present time instead of thinking about all these years down the road where you're not going to have the things that you could enjoy right now.
Yeah, we live in the moment. And I think as we get talking today, that'll be a theme that comes up a lot.
I have several topics, none of them that you're aware of that I want to talk about today, but I think we'll start with the one time so far. If someone's a loyal listener of this program, in episode 1, you and your husband, Dave, were spoken about because George and we crashed your wedding.
This is true.
I was invited. George didn't let you send him an invitation or something, I think.
Oh, he totally got an invitation.
Oh, he did get one?
Because originally, I think we had asked both you and George, we had asked to be like ushers at our wedding or something about this.
Yes.
Or something like that. And so I think the people that were actually our ushers are probably like, what do you mean? We were second-rate ushers? But I'm pretty sure we had asked you and Kurt to be you and George to be ushers at the wedding, and you turned it down.
Yeah, it was weird saying no. Like I couldn't say yes because we had plans that being an usher wouldn't allow for. I remember saying no to you.
Yeah, and I remember thinking at the time, like, okay, something's up. I didn't know what. I didn't know to what extreme, but I knew something was up. So yeah, you guys crashed my wedding.
And George and I told the story in brief, but I'd like to have your perspective. I'm sure I've gotten it once or twice since then, because this would have been, what year is that, 2010?
2010.
2010, late May of 2010?
Yep, May 29th.
And the George and I perspective, we spent the morning getting ready with his brother's boat and dressing as pirates and showing up on shore as your wedding was starting. But it was your wedding day. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure lots of things were going on in your mind.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe briefly you can mention some of those things that go through your mind just prior to this happening and what you saw and how you reacted.
Well, it was such a hot day already. It was like 90 degrees that day. And I was so worried that it was going to be like a severe weather day because working in the weather field at the time, I was just nervous that something weather-wise was going to go wrong. It didn't, but that was in the back of my mind. And so, but like getting ready to, because we had an outside ceremony. And so like getting ready to walk down the stairs, you know, my stomach was in knots. And I'm just wondering, like, how does my hair look? How does my makeup look? Is everything going to go to plan? You know, is the music going to be okay? And so I start walking down, and all I can hear is not the song I had chosen for the entrance music, but I hear Pirates of the Caribbean.
Josh doesn't like this story so far, but maybe he'll learn to love it.
He's going to hear it a lot over the next upteen million years of his life. So
you're hearing a song that you did not plan for. So what thoughts were going into your mind, if you can recall?
So I was thinking, like, Tyler, who was helping out with the music, and so were Rob and Bob, just thinking like, okay, someone slipped them money to play this song as a joke. And I was really baffled, or I thought it was a mistake. But then when I saw these like pirates walking onto our like wedding ceremony area, which was right by the water. And I laughed because I didn't know what else I could do, because I couldn't be mad and I couldn't like scowl at the situation. It was just such a perfect, funny, amusing surprise that, of course, Kurt and George would crash our wedding. Of course they would. Why would they not? Why would they not? Of course they would. So well done.
And I don't think it was our concern, or maybe we hadn't thought about it, that you might be upset, but I don't think that, knowing you, that wasn't really a thought. Like, you weren't going to be mad at us for doing something wild, crazy, and exciting.
Not at all, because it wasn't malicious. That was the thing. It was like, here was this night where we were all going to have a good time. And you guys kicked it off that way. I think it probably helped ease some of the stuffiness of the night, to be honest with you. You know, like, it wasn't this pretentious wedding anymore. Oh, I have a husband rescuing the baby.
Perfect. This isn't live. I mean, I could go back and edit this, but I probably won't. This is just the reality of a young growing family and little kids that are little kids. I mean, and now he's looking at us and he's smiling. He's done crying. He's happy and excited about everything.
Now he wants to know more about the story, because now he's hooked, right? But I just think, like, I don't know, weddings are, I think everyone has such a high expectation of how their night's going to go. And it has to go according to plan. And when it doesn't, you have two choices. You can either unravel and hate the world, or you can be like, that's funny. And so I chose to do the latter because I had no option. I didn't want the other option. And I think it really helps because, and you think of it this way, like, I've known you for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I think every time we get together, that story comes up in some way. And anytime I see like my parents or even our other friends, like, that's what we talk about. People will always talk about that because it was so out of left field, because it was so funny. And that's just a really good memory of that night. Like, I'll remember what my dress looked like, and I'll remember what the color of the cupcakes were and all of this stuff. But I will never forget how these two weirdo pirates and this girl come up on a boat on the Mississippi River and land on our wedding site. Yeah. Well played.
I wonder if he and I would do that to people we did not know, how well that would go.
I wonder how that would go over. Yeah. I think you'd definitely find some bridezillas there.
Okay. We probably won't do that then. Yeah, that's, as George and I talked about in episode 1, that was one of the first big things we did that, you know, I think kind of set a bar for trying to top it. I don't know if we always top it, but we just have this mentality of doing something really big. And I do look back at that very fondly, and just how well it was received by everyone and how we became like the stars of the wedding. Maybe, did we outshine you? I hope not.
Not at all.
Okay, good.
I don't think so at all. No. And if you did, great. You took some of the pressure off me.
Yeah, that's true. We know that you don't like pressure.
Not at all.
Oh, so I guess we'll swoop into the other pressure pack thing that maybe, I mean, there's a lot of pressure in life, but where you were on a broad stage for some years, at least small market TV. I don't know if that's how many people watch, but you were, I'm sure, a local celebrity. For how many years were you in Rochester as a local TV weather person?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
And I recall getting the phone call from you. I don't know if you were going to interview or if it's because you had gotten the job, maybe 2 phone calls, because I lived in Rochester.
Yep.
And I'd made some friends there, but it was really exciting for me when one of my college friends, we met at St. Cloud State University, was going to be moving to town to be in the TV station. And this happened, I guess that was back in, 2000? Whoa, microphone just dropped, but now it's coming back. And see, you have experience with the microphones. And
it says a lot about me.
yes. So was that late
2008?
Late 2000s. Okay. So 2008. And there's some stories involved with that. And I think the first thing is you needed a place to stay right away before you got your own place. And you stayed in my...
Oh, we're going to go there. We're going to talk about this.
You don't want to talk about that?
No, we can talk about this.
My 1-bedroom apartment. It wasn't anything fancy. And you must have stayed on the couch or something. Maybe I stayed on the couch. I'm not sure. I guess that's not relevant. But I had this gym membership that I had for maybe 9 months, and I went to the gym perhaps 3 or 4 times. And one of the times I was at the gym, I missed some text messages or phone calls from Steph, because what happened, Steph?
Well, Steph was really excited that night because I was finishing up my first week at work, and I was going to drive back to Minneapolis that night to stay at Dave's parents' house because he still lived up in the Twin Cities. And so we were doing this long distance relationship thing. And so I was really excited, and I was home on my dinner break. And I remember I'd made soup that night. And I don't remember if you had started to eat with me and then you had left, or if you were just not there when I came home. I don't know. But anyway, I remember the bowl of soup on the table. I remember putting croutons in it, and I was really excited about it. But I thought to myself, I am going to pack my bag now so that when I'm done with work, instead of driving all the way back to your house, which was 10 minutes away, but still, I'm just going to toss my luggage in the car now so that I can take off right from the station and head up to the cities. So that's where I went wrong, because in my excitement, something happened when I got to the top of the stairs. And at your apartment, it was a set of 13 stairs leading straight down to the door down below. Mm-hmm. And whatever happened, I missed that first step. And my luggage was really heavy because I'm a girl and I don't pack light.
Yeah. That's what girls do.
That's what girls do. And the last thing I remember is I literally saw my life flash before my eyes. And all of the thoughts that come to your mind of when you're in a situation like that, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. How's this going to end? I have a lot of things I have to do. I have a lot of things yet to do in my life. I have a bowl of soup sitting in the kitchen. I got to go back to work. And I remember landing at the bottom, chin first. And there was this really bright white light. Mm. And it was also February, obviously. And so there was so much of the road salt on the carpet. Ugh. And I remember that feeling as it hit my face. But then I remember I opened my eyes and I looked around and I was I'm alive. I think I'm okay and I could move, which I was in shock because I literally landed on my chin. That's how I landed. And then I noticed that I wasn't okay because I had blood gushing from my chin. And so you were the first person I thought to call because I was I need to go to the doctor. This isn't okay. And I couldn't get a hold of you.
So did I eventually, I remember eventually getting back to the locker and finding my phone and seeing that I had these missed calls or messages. Yeah. Did I then come back to get you there? Did somebody else get you to the hospital? I don't recall.
You did. So I called you, I think about 6 times and just in panic. And then I called Dave and I couldn't get a hold of Dave. And then I called Randy, who was my chief meteorologist and now a good friend of mine, but a good friend at the time too, as I was getting to know him. And he was at home on his dinner break with his 2 little kids and his wife. And I told him Randy, I fell down the stairs. And he was like, what? What did you do? He was like, are you at work? And I said, no, I'm at my friend Kurt's house. And he's like, you fell down the stairs? What? Because remember, being new to Rochester, I had no idea where anything was. And this was before I even had a smartphone where I could even Google.
This was the end of the first week, right?
Yeah. I didn't know anything in Rochester. I didn't know where a hospital was. I didn't even know where a doctor's office was. And it was 7:00 at night on a whatever night of the week it was. And I just knew it wasn't a good situation. So Randy tried to give me directions to it. And then I called my dad and my dad laughed at me when I told him I'd fallen down the stairs.
Oh, that's good.
But at that point, I was just so wrapped up in anxiety because I'd made the mistake to go into your bathroom and I'd ruined your Rochester, the honkers or the whatever towel it was. I'd grabbed a towel and I remember like I ruined that towel and I felt so bad about that. But I'd made the mistake of looking in the mirror at it. And so then I was like this whole other like anxiety of what do I do? The thought of calling 911 never came to mind.
Do you think that situation warranted a 911 call?
I mean, looking back on it, no, I don't think so. Because I think you came in the nick of time. I think like maybe had it been another 20, 30 minutes, I probably would have called because I couldn't stop the bleeding on my chin. But anyway, so you finally like you get there.
Yeah, probably 10 minutes away once I get the information and get to my car, get you. And
Yep. And like I honestly feel like I'm in shock. Like I can't believe this is happening. And so you take me to the urgent care place.
Yep.
And I remember like I was just hysterical because I was like, I have to be on TV in a couple of days. Like this is my job. And my face looked horrible. It was horrible. And so I think you eventually got a hold of Dave. And so he drove down and came and got me. And they, stitched me up and they did x-rays and nothing was broken. Miraculously, I wasn't missing any teeth miraculously. I have no idea how I escaped from that with just 6 or 7 stitches in my chin. I don't know. Someone was definitely watching out for me that day and was like, this isn't your time to go, honey, because you got some stuff to do.
We can't get rid of you that easy, Steph.
Nope, apparently not.
So that was you're supposed to go on TV starting the second week, I recall, but they delayed it a few days because of your facial injuries.
They delayed it a week because I had such bad rug burn from the fall. And it was just so painful. Like I remember I couldn't eat because it was just such a raw and sore spot. So when they did put me on TV later that next week, I was covering a snowstorm. And do you remember this?
Yeah, I do.
They made me wear a scarf around my chin. So here's this like new reporter standing along the side of Highway 52, mumbling her words because her mouth's in pain yet. And she has a red scarf around the bottom of her chin. And my friend Adam, I remember like my favorite comment about it was like, I can't put my chin on it, but I feel like you're hiding something.
I do recall, at least in those early days, watching whenever you're on TV, because they were like the weekend person. So you'd fill in maybe in the morning when the morning guy was in there, or the evening guy was in there, the morning guy, or whatever. You'd be the weekend person and fill-in person, and occasionally you'd do some other stories there initially, or I guess in those 3 years, you were always the number 3, I guess, right?
Yeah. I always had the weekend shift, which was great because I made so many great friends, especially on that weekend shift.
Yeah.
That I still keep in touch with.
That's where the newer people, maybe no jobs previously, or maybe one after college, come in. And
that's where you start. That's where you grow into TV and then you launch from there. Unless you really feel compelled to stay there for whatever reason. And a lot of people do because they've set roots down by that time. And I think truthfully, like, had I not decided to change careers, I probably would have stayed there for a while because it was a really nice spot to work. But yeah, I would fill in for Ted. I'd fill in for Randy. And then I remember when they had budget cuts, they put me into reporting. And I did not want to do reporting because I felt like that wasn't me, right? Like I was a meteorologist. That was my identity. I was made to do weather and nothing else. But because I always have to work to impress people, I set the bar a little too high. And so guess what I got to do more of?
More reporting.
Yeah.
Because they thought, oh, she's pretty good at this. We don't need to hire anybody else. We can't hire anybody else. So Steph MacPhail. So
I think which definitely led to some great opportunities. I met some wonderful contacts through reporting. And I'd like to think like my interest in birding got started from a story that I did on a woman that did a lot of birding herself.
So would they have you do all kinds of stories or mostly things that kind of related to the environment in some way?
They tried to keep it to that, thankfully, because I always thought it was weird that you would be a weather person or a meteorologist, I should say, for the official term, and then have to go report on some robbery and interview a person and say like, yeah, I'm the meteorologist, but how did this make you feel?
Did you ever have to do that?
I'd never had to do that, thankfully. Yeah.
Okay.
So I always got a lot of the softer stories, which was great. And I think that's where a lot of my personality got to shine more.
And you touched on it, so we can transition to that, is after about 3 years, you left that profession. You didn't try to pursue it elsewhere or do something else. You made this big change in your plan because it seemed like you wanted to be a TV meteorologist that you went to school for.
Yeah.
You put years in at UTVS, the campus TV station, got your first job. Probably you're in position to maybe get a job in a bigger market. But when that time came, you decided, nope, going to do something else.
Yeah. And you and I had met in college too.
Yeah.
And I had so many good memories of working at the TV station in college, so many good memories of working in Rochester. But there was a lot of anxiety wrapped into it. And just so much pressure to look a certain way and talk a certain way and act a certain way. And I just thinking of like the hours that I was working and how I wanted to have a family, and just knowing that that was probably going to be not the quality of life that I wanted moving forward with the family. So I was getting a little bit more interested into teaching because I was lucky enough to work with school groups, Boy Scout, Girl Scout troops, church groups. And so I would go into schools and do little lessons with them. And I kept thinking to myself, like, this is really fun. Like, I think I want to do more of this. And which was like an identity crisis for me, because I had wanted to be a meteorologist from the age of 5. Like when I could first say the word, which I could never say the word when I was little.
It's a difficult word to say.
It's a very difficult word. My sister and I would always fight over who could say it the best. But from 5 years old, that's what I wanted to do. And so when I was 26, 27, and all of a sudden thinking to myself, I don't know who I am anymore. That was scary. That was really scary.
I'm going to step back to the groups meeting with you. Would these groups reach out to the TV station to see if someone could like come do some presentation, and then they would send you because they thought you were the best at it, or like you're lowest in rank?
Lowest in rank, maybe.
Okay.
No, I think, Randy did a lot of them. Ted did a lot of them. And so I was always happy to take them on when the opportunity came up. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they were directly like, oh, we'd like Steph to come out. Or other times it would be like, hey, does anyone want to go do this? And sure, why not? I like kids.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Because you were a local celebrity, TV meteorologist.
Yeah. And do you remember the storm in October 2000? Was it 2009? But I'd forecasted like light rain for the day, and it turned out to be 4 inches.
You're one of those people.
I was one of those people.
Oh, I forgot.
I remember like I went to the grocery store after my shift that day, and I walked in with my hood like really high up over my face because I was so embarrassed.
So you thought people would have seen your forecast and then seen you in public and been upset at you? Would have they?
Absolutely. I mean, people cornered you in the grocery store for the weirdest things.
Really? Oh, tell me about this.
I mean, like you as a meteorologist don't go to the store before a blizzard. You just don't. You don't, because you will be cornered for this, that, or the other reason. Do you really think it's going to snow that much? What are the road conditions going to be like from Preston to Hoka? Or, right? Like, I don't know. Let's just wait. And in the words of Tyler Bieber, let's just wait and we'll see it when it gets here. Right?
That seems like a better plan.
Yeah. I think, every meteorologist starts or has that happen to them. And I think even when you are at your prime of your career, I think that stuff can still happen. It's just a testament to the fact that we can try to do all of this really awesome forecasting, but the air is still going to win. It's still going to win. It's always going to win, I think.
I think people like me that have never been a meteorologist. I did take one meteorology class in college, but I don't remember learning almost anything. That's probably just because I didn't apply myself well enough. But when we're watching TV weather, or however we get our weather, what are we watching? We're watching you. Let's say it's you. What have you done? What have you seen? What are you applying to what to even tell us anything about what's probably going to happen in the weather?
And I think that was really frustrating for me, because here I'd spent, 4.5 years of college of learning how to like read maps and read model data and and look at all these different components and to make a forecast. But you had such limited time, because you had to push out things to the local paper. You had to get this ready online. You had to do your tapes for the previews for coming up for the later shows. There were so many other things that you had to do aside from just forecasting, where that was really frustrating. And I wish like I could have spent my 8 hours forecasting instead of being like, I'm going to forecast for an hour, get all of my stuff for the show ready, get my makeup ready, do this and this and this and this and this, and then maybe I should forecast again too, So a lot of the time it was, you got really, I guess, good at being succinct with your forecasting. Like you would look at a couple models, look at as many as you could in the time that you had, look at some raw data, see where that was coming in, look at the current conditions, see what the models have been doing. Have they been having like a warm bias, a dry bias, whatever? And then, just kind of checking your numbers against like what Randy or Ted had forecasted. And then even the weather service, just to make sure that you weren't like way off the mark with something. I always loved reading their forecast discussions too, just to make sure that I wasn't missing something. Because once again, you had such a small, time to make a forecast for a pretty broad area.
At this point in my life, I don't concern myself with whether or not a forecast is totally correct, but I know a lot of people seem to have this expectation that it should be right, like all the time. And when it's off by something that like upsets some people, a lot of people I don't know, what would you say to those people that have an expectation of something near perfection from their meteorologist?
I think it's one of those things where it's like school. Like everyone goes to school, so they have an experience with it. So they think they know how it works. Everyone has an experience with weather. Like weather affects their daily life. So they feel like they can forecast it. They feel like they know what's going to happen, right? Because they have that experience daily with weather. And when you live in a place long enough, you get to know the climate and the seasons and how things work. But it's a struggle because there's so much more that goes into it than just being a pretty face on TV. There's so much.
Which you were.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Except for the chin.
My fault. The chin. I should have had a level 1 apartment, not level 2. Or an elevator.
Yeah. That would have been great. No, it's fine. But there's so much math and science that goes into it. And the fact that, I spent 4 years working on calculus in college, then to transition into a career where you don't use any of that, but you're still forecasting. And it's really hard to tell people that essentially what you're doing is taking this gaseous blob and trying to compress it and tell it to do something that you think it's going to do. Like, that's hard. Have you ever tried to capture air in a container?
No.
Try it sometime and then make it do something and tell me how that turns out for you.
I don't want to, Steph. You can't make me.
The joke has always been that, it's a good thing you're not a heart surgeon because you're only right 50% of the time. And, can you imagine if you were in any other career and you were only right 50% of the time? Well, it's better than 25% right of the time. It's better than not being right. It's better than not giving you a heads up that there's a tornado coming. It's better than not having some idea that there's going to be a big snowstorm, coming next week. It's better than nothing.
And that career is now long in the past for you.
I'd still like to say that I do look at models every day yet.
Do you?
I do, because I'm still fascinated by it. And I still like to be on the in with that. And then I like to argue with what the meteorologists in the metro area are thinking.
Are you ready to step in? If they're shorthanded someday, does anyone have your phone number? They can call you to step in at a moment's notice and go on the air with your forecast.
I'll have dreams and actually nightmares about that sometime. Sometimes I will. Yeah. Seriously, it will come to mind. And it's either a really funny dream or a really terrifying dream. Mm-hmm. There was a time, do you remember? Because we started going to the gym together for a while. Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
Before you dropped your membership.
Okay.
Yeah. And I remember you told me, and maybe this was the first 6 months I was working there. And you were like, you have to watch how you breathe on air. Do you remember telling me that?
No.
You take these really deep breaths in between your sentences. And I remember thinking to myself, who are you to be telling me how I can breathe on TV?
So was I right or not?
Well, after that, I became really aware of it.
Too aware?
Yeah.
Ah, dang it. Sorry, Steph.
But I always remember that. So there's always so many people critiquing you. We had a consultant that would come in all the time and tell us you shouldn't wear this, or try wearing this instead, or try doing this instead. I just never felt like I could be perfect. And that's what I wanted to be, was perfect. Which
is one of the reasons you left, as you explained, that job, because
I knew I wasn't going to be a perfect mom in that career. I knew I wasn't going to be a perfect meteorologist. I knew I wasn't going to be a perfect size 4, which is what I was trying to aim for, because it was cool to be thin on TV and I was not thin. And so I was, setting up all these expectations for myself that fast forward 10, 11 years later, I'm still not perfect at anything.
You're never going to, no one's going to be perfect at anything.
Right.
It may be in a given
This is
moment,
true.
you can be perfect on like some sort of a test of something, but in general, we can't be perfect. So are you still striving for perfection and realizing that you're missing too often?
No.
Okay.
No, but that took me a long time to get over.
Okay.
Dun, 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 to be continued.
Let's talk more about the recent years then. You went back, got your education degree or degrees, however that works.
Yeah.
And have transitioned into that career.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a totally different career.
Totally different career in some ways, but in other ways it's not, because you are presenting 7 hours out of the day. You got to make it interesting for the kids. The kids aren't going to listen to you if you're just this monotone subject. I mean, you think about everything that kids have nowadays. They're playing Fortnite. They're playing video games, which are just, like constant stimulation in their faces. You have to compete with that every single day for every single minute that you're with them. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like TV.
And you can decide how much into detail you want to get, but you are a 5th grade teacher at this moment in time.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
So I can't imagine. We were talking before we started recording about like the lack of substitute teachers, and the thought had previously crossed my mind that maybe that's something I could try at some point. And you pretty much shot that down right away. Like, it's not worth it. Don't do it.
I was telling my students that I think substitute teaching, because I was a substitute for a short period of time, but I did it before I was fully employed by the district that I'm currently in. But I was telling my students, like, it is probably one of the hardest jobs out there. Now, obviously, you could definitely argue and persuade me that there are other careers that are definitely intense, which I'm not arguing against or anything. Like, there's a lot of tough jobs out there. But for substitute teaching, you have 7 hours to make an impression on a kid and to help them realize that you are there to help make them the best for the day. But they are not the normal teacher. They don't know how the normal teacher runs the ship. And that's really hard for a lot of kids. And so we see a lot of behavior issues that come out on sub days. And I mean, I get it. And it's just really challenging to walk into that environment. And but I think if you're up for that challenge, there are some fantastic substitute teachers out there. And I think you could be one of them.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to trying. It's going to be lower on the priority list now based on your reaction to it earlier. I want to learn what then this career path that you're on, and I don't know how far into the future you're planning on continuing it, because I know that it seems like this day and age people, and even you've demonstrated a few years ago that you're willing to change course in life. What do you find as the most rewarding thing about the job, and what are the biggest challenges about teaching elementary age children?
Sure. Well, I always thought I was going to teach middle school, first off, because I always wanted to teach. And when I say always, I mean, since working in the meteorology field, I wanted to teach earth science. I wanted to stay somewhere in my career field. And I've really always been interested in earth processes and weather and things like that. So it felt like a natural fit. And that's 8th grade in Minnesota. They learned that in 8th grade. And then I did some student teaching at the middle school, and I did some student teaching at the elementary level. And I fell in love with the older grades in elementary. And it was a really neat experience. They're at that point in life where they're not, like, they still like you as a teacher. They still want to impress you because they're only 10 years old. They need a lot of love yet, but they're starting to branch out. They're starting to become their own person. They want to have more challenging conversations. And so I really like that age level for that reason. I think one of the most rewarding things in my career so far has been putting an environmental focus on our education. We built this outdoor classroom at our school that I've been a big part of, and bringing in bird watching to the school and trying to engage kids in more conservation techniques, such as recycling and storm sewer management and things like that. And I think just because that's something that I feel passionate about is where the health of our planet stands nowadays. And if I can start to embed these little thoughts in kids' minds now.
Plant these seeds.
No pun intended. Thank you. I was trying to search for that. That makes me feel really good. That I feel like hopefully this generation can continue what our generation, as in you and me, is trying to do now and undo the things that have happened for the last...
They need to.
Exactly. Right? Like,
as far as we know, they absolutely need to.
Exactly. And that makes me feel proud about the hard work that I put in every day. Yeah, I teach math. Yeah, I teach reading. Yeah, I teach writing. Yes, I act as a social worker. I act as a mom. I act as a nurse. All of these things that teachers do during the day, they don't just teach. You are a role model for all of these kids in so many different aspects of life. But I'm just really thankful for the opportunity to be able to help kind of create the next stewards of our world. That'll be good for our kids someday too. Challenges. There's so many challenges. I don't even know where to start. And poverty, just coming to a common understanding of how different cultures work in one common setting. Just trying to close the achievement gap and equity. And there's so much that goes into 7 hours a day.
I think I know what achievement gap is, but explain that a little bit.
So the achievement gap is especially looking at the fact how white students perform better than students of color, and also students in a poverty setting. And how can we, on looking at like academic scores, how can we close that gap? Because generally speaking, there's a pretty big gap between how students that are Caucasian perform compared to students of color and students in poverty and lower socioeconomic status. And that's been a big thing for the last 20 years, is trying to close that achievement gap. And it's so hard. It's so hard because you have to think about all of these things that these kids deal with every day. And for a lot of them, like, learning is the last thing. First, they need to be fed. They need to be loved. They need to know where they're going to sleep tonight. They're going to need to be taken care of emotionally and mentally. And a kid is not going to learn until those things are taken care of. And so we keep trying to push these, like, you got to do good on this test. You got to do good on this test. We have to close this achievement gap. We're not going to close that achievement gap unless we meet all of those just basic needs first.
And for someone like me that's removed from the education system, and I'm sure some people listening would be surprised at how many children are in these situations where they're lacking these really important things.
Yeah. At my school in particular, we have 2/3 of our students on free and reduced lunch. And that just gives you an idea of just how high of needs a lot of these kids are, just for money wise, so it's one of those things, like, if you don't know, like, if you have a bad day, or if you don't feel good, or if something is bothering you, you might have some coping skills to deal with it. But if you don't know how to manage those things, or if you're worried about it, you're not going to focus on anything else. You're not going to focus on learning. You're going to focus on trying to take care of yourself first. So that's one of the things that we are struggling with in school, and why we are trying to push for more social workers and counselors in school, and just more social emotional support, and making sure that kids get free meals every day, because they don't know when their next meal is going to come. And so a lot of our extended breaks, like Christmas break or winter break and spring break, are difficult for our kids because it's not the glory days that you and I had when we had breaks, or maybe we took trips, or it was like, yeah, a week in no school, woohoo. For a lot of our kids, it's, I don't know when I'm going to eat next. I don't know who's going to be at home tonight. I don't even know if I'm going to have a home tonight.
And for the fortunate kids that aren't dealing with any of this, like, they've got a home where all of their needs are met, they're in position to keep on doing better and better. And the other kids are just, some of them are being left behind then educationally. Yeah.
And you think about, I'm sure when you were a kid, like, your parents were probably pretty involved with your school life. Would you say?
Yeah, they wanted to make sure I was getting good grades. And that was something on just the recent episode with my sister, is as long as I got good grades, everything was fine. But I talked about not really having this desire to learn. I just had a desire to get good grades, which I think is fairly common. Like, because that's how we measure someone's ability, is, are they getting A's or B's or C's or D's or F's? And I think I would propose a better, different system to just assure that kids are learning and not just passing because they're good at passing. I was good at passing. I was good at getting good test scores and then brain dumping, as I think a lot of people do.
Yeah. And I think that's just how our educational system has worked. And because no one really has tried to tear it apart. I mean, maybe someone has, but that's a big task to underdo. All of that thinking of just grades in general. But I completely agree with you, because I think like if we want to continue to be successful in this world and to come up with new ideas, you got to work harder than just to get by with an A. You have to go for like, what is driving you to learn? Like, what are you passionate about? Mm-hmm. Like, let's turn teaching into that. Like, let's meet you where you're at and meet you at what you're interested in and weave the learning in there.
What's the title of that lady that, I don't know if she's popular in this position, Betsy DeVos, what position does she hold right now?
Secretary of Education.
If tomorrow it was announced that Stephanie MacPhail was the new Secretary of Education, I don't know if you think about this. If you had so much power in education, what do you think are the biggest things that need to happen for this system to see great improvements?
I wouldn't want to be in that position.
It's too bad you're in that position. You've been appointed by our president.
No.
You've been appointed by the next president because you have all this great experience and you care so much about everything. What are at least a couple things that could change relatively quickly that you think are needed?
I think first off, we need more mental health support in schools, without a doubt. We need to stop penalizing teachers for poor test scores. We need to go back and look at what students need first to be successful, which is that just basic needs. We need to make sure that those are met. And that's a big thing right there, right? We need to have more of a focus on taking care of our planet. You'd be surprised the number of adults that I know that still don't know how to recycle or like reuse the back of a sheet of paper. You can reuse that. That's cool. So those are some of the things I think. More environmental education. I don't think we need charter schools. I don't think we need, to hand out vouchers to allow parents to decide where their kid's going to go to school. If the school has higher test scores, I want my kid to go there. So give me a voucher for it so I can send my kid there. I think we just really need to consider how we are structuring our schools and the fact that A, B, C's, D's, and F's don't mean anything. Mm-hmm. What matters for the rest of your life is your potential and your drive to get there. And if you want to be something someday, whether it is a garbage truck driver or whether it is a neurosurgeon or whether it is a meteorologist on KGTC in Rochester, Minnesota, you need to have and create for yourself drive and potential to get there. And we need to foster that in schools more.
And that's something I don't think I ever really got and never learned about. And that's something as I'm 35 years old and soon to be 36, I'm continuing to try to create for myself in some way. Mm-hmm. And I think it's growing, but I didn't have it properly. It never was the focus, I don't think, my whole life. So I think it takes some time to try to come to that. Like I realized that eventually that, okay, I'm lacking this, but how many kids aren't getting that presented to them and maybe never will learn to ever look for it? Well,
I think it's hard too. It's like when you're 5 years old, you're not going to say to yourself, oh, I'm going to be driven to have the potential to do this someday. Like it's just our culture, right? Like our parents went to school, they got A, B, C, D's, and F's. We do it too. We're handed a curriculum to teach it, test on it, and we're moving you on to the next grade. Like that's just how it is.
I think let's transition to something I knew I wanted to talk about is your care for, enjoyment of the environment. You've touched on how it would have related to your teaching career if you taught 8th graders and how you've kind of made it work within the school of, what is it, K through 5 where you're at?
Yep.
Presenting some things. Okay, so you're not teaching 8th graders earth science, but at least you're trying to incorporate some aspects of that into the school. Just in general, though, in your life, where does that come from? Where did you first see this desire for being outdoors in the environment? Because you have that to a great level. I don't really have it so much. I appreciate it now more than I used to. I'm curious where that comes from.
I think as kids, and this is something that kids nowadays don't do anymore, you just don't go outside and play. And that's what we did when we were kids. We would be outside rolling on the grass until the crickets were chirping at like 9 o'clock at night and your parents are yelling at you to get in the house, you know? Like we'd be outside making snow forts. And we spent so much time outside. And as a kid, like I didn't have this great appreciation for like, oh, I must save the world. I remember like I wrote a book when I was 7 or 8 about like save the trees because I had heard that the trees are getting cut down and like the rainforest was being demolished.
You were an author at 7 years old?
Whatever you want to call author.
Yes. So you
I
were
folded some papers in half and
And how many copies did you sell?
1.
Nice. Who bought it?
Me.
Oh, well, okay.
I think I still have that book. But I remember my dad challenging me and saying like, well, we need to cut trees down because we need it for this and this and this and this. And I just remember thinking like how unfair that was to cut a tree down because you needed it for something. So fast forward a little bit later. And my dad always was really interested in environmental issues. And his career, he was a charter captain on Lake Michigan. It involved, you know, understanding the weather and understanding water quality and all of these things that I think I'm still learning myself about what was all wrapped into his career. But he was a hunter, and although that's something I didn't necessarily agree with, he definitely had an appreciation for, you know, trying to protect animals. Especially the threatened ones. And so he worked at the DNR, not as like a career, but like he would go to DNR meetings that I remember, and advocate for needs. But I don't think it was really until I got into college that I really started to develop an understanding of how critical it was to love our planet. And by that time I had adopted a vegetarian lifestyle, and I was more conscious of just recycling in general. And then when I met Dave, I think Dave was kind of the one that threw me full-fledged into being more of an environmentally focused person. He introduced me to places like the Boundary Waters, where there's no place in the United States that is like that. And just the fact of like thinking about how fast our climate is changing and how in 100 years or so, the Boundary Waters could look completely different from how it looks now. That makes me really sad because it is such a pristine place that I have such like wonderful memories of that I want my kids and my grandkids and great grandkids to experience someday. And so I just think there's like all these issues that, and I think as I've learned more since my college years and meeting Dave and just recognizing like, yeah, we can reuse this, we can recycle this, we can find ways to lessen our carbon footprint. We don't need to buy 50 shampoo bottles a year. We can buy a shampoo bar of soap and that will last us just as long. And I think it gets easier now because I think we have momentum where there are more and more people that are invested now in coming up with ways to help the environmental crisis that we have. So I think there's been a lot of things at play here that I've been exposed to and people in my life that have kind of led me to an understanding of this is a beautiful world and I want to do what I can to keep it that way.
So you say environmental crisis, and I don't disagree with you. I just don't have the knowledge base probably like you do. So for anyone that might be listening to our conversation that also hasn't spent a lot of time trying to understand this, what can you offer to help us understand what's been happening to the earth the last however many years or decades and what's going to happen and why we should all care as close to as much as you do?
I think we've made such amazing gains in this planet over such a short period of time. If you think of like from the Industrial Revolution, where we started developing all of these things and we just started exploiting Earth's resources because it, one, made us money. It, two, made our life easier. So back then, like they didn't know what we knew now. They didn't know that burning coal and, polluting water was going to have repercussions down the road. But that's what happened. And it's one of those things that we know now what polluting the water does. We know now what carbon emissions do to the atmosphere. We have all this information. It's the fact that some people refuse to do anything about it. That's really disheartening. Like, we've seen the science and the research says that, yeah, polluting the water damages the ecosystem and the habitat, which we know that if you remove a species from a food chain, it has devastating effects on the entire food chain. If you pollute or if you use lead ammunition and, an eagle comes along and is a scavenger and eats it, that will end up with lead poisoning. And so just these things that people continue to do that we have data that proves that it's not good for us, but it's still happening. That's frustrating. But at the same time, it's really overwhelming to think about like all of these things in the world that we need to fix. Like, we need to fix the warming of the planet. We need to fix the pollution of our waters. We need to fix how we handle landfills and recycling and all of these things, and the plastic straw debate right now. And it's really hard to wrap your head around, like, I'm just one person. Can I really make a difference? But you can. That's the thing. And I think if everyone started to think that way, that, yeah, I'm just one person, but I can make a huge difference by just doing one simple thing. Like, maybe it is to start bringing your own reusable mug to the coffee shop. Maybe it's remembering to bring in, your reusable bags when you go to the grocery store, like what we were talking about earlier. Maybe it's thinking about trying a ride sharing system, or if you know that you're going to be running errands, maybe run all of the errands on that side of the town together instead of being like, oh, drive back and forth consistently. There's just so many little things in general that really can add up to a bigger, helpful thing in the end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I've been to several different countries the last few years. And I think the one that jumps out to me the most is I usually stay at Airbnbs. I stay in someone's home when I travel most of the time. And I recall the place I stayed in Oslo, Norway. It was somewhat shocking to me. The ladies whose home I stayed in, she had maybe 6 different receptacles for, depending on what your waste was. There was certain types of recycling and compost. And then like the last possible thing is the trash. And it was very important to her, and I think kind of that country and that part of the world especially, to do things well, to preserve what we can preserve, and the things that we can't preserve but can go back to the environment and do that, like the compost, and the things that just have no further use, I guess that will be the trash. It was very important there. And I just, for a variety of reasons, it's not that important to a high enough percentage of the people in this country yet. And it's going to kind of have to be like everyone in the world, or at least most parts of the world, are going to have to care enough for things to really change. And it does seem overwhelming because there's a lot of forces against making this happen in this country right now. But I guess if we have this conversation and a few people hear it, and some of those people actually like learn something from it or care enough, maybe there just needs to be a lot of this happening all over the place, I guess.
Yeah. And like you said, there's a lot of things working against us here. One of it, there's a misconception that, and maybe not even a full misconception, but that it's expensive to be green, right? Things like reusable straws and reusable mugs cost money. And I think for like the United States, we're such a time crunched country. We thrive on things that are quick and easy to access and that are affordable. And so if you're like a parent of kids and you got to be at Jimmy's softball practice or baseball practice and Megan's swimming meet and you still got to get food tonight. Yeah, you're going to go through the drive-thru and you're going to get all of the wrappers and things like that, because we have driven ourselves as a society into such a stressful just lifestyle of be here, be here, be here, be here. And I think a lot of that has caused our pollution and just lack of being green. But on the note of that too, like, then let's talk to our school kids about like, what's a difference that you can make in this world? And let's drive, let's engineer some thinking out of that, of here's a crisis that we're having. How can we fix it? What can you do about it now? And I think a lot of kids don't get that nowadays. They just go through the motions of their days. One, because they're kids and they can be kids, but I just worry about this is going to become such a big problem because I think there's so many people that refuse to open up their minds to what their life could look like by making just a few simple choices of something different.
And I don't think change is easy.
No, not at all.
I do think, though, that if you become passionate enough and interested enough in something, change does become kind of just the second nature to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have to carve those new pathways in your brain, right? If you are so used to doing something for so long, you have those connections between synapses in your brain, like that's a thick pathway. So yeah, like breaking that pathway and carving a new pathway definitely takes time. But isn't it worth it?
I think it's worth it. I like to just, because I haven't done the research myself, and that's not my background is science. I like to think, well, in the event, what if there is a chance that the vast majority of scientists, they're wrong, and this is just a natural climate cycle and it's happening, and as some people certainly believe that,
Right.
there's no problem. Well, I think, okay, even if that's one of the possibilities, there is also a possibility that they're dead on, they're right, and we are headed for global catastrophe for the human species sometime in the next, I don't know, 1 or 2 or 3 generations, whatever it is. That if I'm envisioning either my nieces and nephews and their future kids, or your children, or if
Right.
I have kids, why would I not care about those people? If we've ever cared about like our descendants and what our ancestors went through to allow us to be here, to not care about what we're doing and continue to make improvements in our day-to-day lives. So whatever we're leaving behind for these people that we may never meet, but we certainly would love if we could, why would we leave them in just this potentially awful situation?
Right. And I think it's because it's such an abstract concept and idea. People can't see it, and people need a lot of those things to see and to touch and experience in order to believe it. And I think because it is a prediction, and it's nothing that is absolutely set in stone that this is the year that this is going to happen. Like, I think to a lot of people, it's just turning a blind eye to it. Like, I'm not going to have to deal with it. I'm not going to see it. So whatever.
And screw my kids. I don't care about my kids.
Right.
That's what that's saying. Or
Kind of,
their
yeah.
grandkids.
Yeah. And, and even if, let's just, humor each other here. And maybe the scientists are wrong. And maybe there is no such thing as global warming right now. But even if there's not, what's the problem with trying to make change to what we are doing?
Mm-hmm.
What's so wrong about that?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it.
Right. What's the difficulty with that? I think of like at our school, how they went away from like their milk cartons now have a wax coating in them. So we can't, compost them or recycle them anymore. Like, why? That was a really easy switch. Some days we have styrofoam lunch trays at lunch. Why? Like, what? I don't get it. There's so many things I don't understand about all of these backward things that we do yet when we know that they're just not good.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of companies and businesses that they exist to make money, and
Right.
they'll make products, even if some of the people in charge know that it's not the best thing. At first, they got to make money, and then think, oh, once I make enough money, I'll start to do these things. And they probably just never do, because I think making money becomes addicting for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Right. And if you can exploit something and make money off it, then why would you stop doing that? And I think that's why we're here. That's why we're here in this situation we're in.
I have a few more topics if you have a little more time to share with me today, Steph.
Go for it.
Okay. So related to that, and we talked about one of them just a little bit before we started recording, is like the future going to happen someday giant earthquake on the West Coast. That's one of the things that's going to happen that is going to affect the United States. And then the other day I was listening to something that were talking about is it going to be like a super volcano from, is it Yellowstone or what's these are things that are going to
heard about this.
like that have been predicted. These are going to happen. They can't say when. Maybe it's kind of overdue based on whatever they're looking at. Like, these are things that I don't think anything we're doing now is really affecting. Maybe that does affect it in some way. These are things that just the Earth every once in a great while does things that might kill a lot of things or everybody, like it did to the dinosaurs, except for the birds.
Right.
The owls especially.
That's for Bryce.
Yeah. Steph's son, Bryce, really likes owls. So I guess I wanted to know if you'd done research into either one of these things and just kind of what you think about these Earth phenomenons that are going to, if they don't impact us in our lifetime again, not far from now, there's going to be just major awful things happening because of the Earth's natural ways.
Yeah. And I think it's once again, it's things that people don't see. Like they can't feel the Earth's tectonic plates moving every day, but technically we're crawling along like we're on a molten plate that is moving. And over time, Earth has evolved from Pangea, which was all of the continents together, and the land masses spread apart, and those land masses keep spreading apart.
Which is also so abstract that they've traveled, that how long the Earth has had to have been around, and it has been, and the math works, I guess, to move everything that far.
Yeah. Right?
It's you can't comprehend it. Our brains are not developed enough to do that.
And that's so difficult. And it even just baffles me to think about that. And it baffles me to think about the universe too, and like all of the different stars and planets and other galaxies out there. Like that's just mind blowing to me. But yeah, I mean, the Earth's plates are going to move, and I don't have a great, full understanding in, tectonic plates and geological processes and things like that. But I have read things that, scientists have found over time that this point in time has marked that this has happened on the Earth. And so once again, it's possible that this will happen again because as the plates continue to shift. And yeah, so it's entirely possible. And it's entirely possible that we also might be hanging out with Europe again someday. I don't know. And that's something that you and I will never see.
We might not be.
But yeah, it's just one of those abstract concepts that it's really hard to wrap your mind around because you can't physically touch it or see it or experience it. But there's a speculation that it might again happen someday.
And the Earth's going to be fine. Just that people and species living on the planet are going to be affected by all these things that are happening.
And you think too, and I think even as I've taught elementary kids this over the years and even as an adult, as a 34-year-old, this is really hard for me to understand that someday our planet will cease to exist altogether, not because of what we're doing to it, but because of the sun. Like the sun's going to go away someday. And that's just a really creepy concept to think about. Mm-hmm. Like, whoa.
What's that, like 3 billion years away?
Something like that. I mean, it's going to be here before you know it.
Yeah.
Right.
Kind of.
Yeah, kind of. But like, that's the stuff that sometimes keeps me up at night. Just like wondering, I don't know, like, what's that going to look like? Like, will I be witnessing that from heaven? I don't know. Like, what does that look like? Do I want to see that? I don't know. I don't know either,
Stephanie.
Yeah, okay. At least I'm not alone there.
No. One thing we haven't talked about yet, Steph, is I'm aware that you've had some struggles with anxiety, and it's something that I don't think I've really dealt with, so I don't totally understand, but I know a lot of people do. So what can you explain to me?
Well, I think anxiety is just one of those invisible things that you deal with. Sometimes it can be visible depending on like the things that you show with your anxiety. Some people might tap their legs. Some people might get flushed in the face. Some people might, stutter more or shake their hands or like sweat. But anxiety, I think as a whole, is just really invisible. And there's still this stigma, although it's lessening, about talking about it. But if it's truly an all-consuming thing, which can be really problematic if you don't know how to talk about it. And so when I was working in Rochester and I was engaged, I was planning a wedding, I was working all of these crazy shifts. And like something just kind of snapped in me. And I don't know what it was, but I started having these terrible panic attacks. And like to the point of where I was afraid to be alone because I didn't know what was going to happen.
I remember at least one time you asked me to come over and stay with you because something was going on.
Yeah. But I was so embarrassed about it because not really understanding at the time what was going on. Like I knew that something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't understand how I felt the way I felt. And I didn't know who to talk to about it because it was such a weird thing. And I felt like I had to be this strong person. I was this college graduate who had all of these things going in for her right in life. But here I was like crumbling on the inside. And that didn't make any sense to me. And no one had ever talked to me before about feeling this way. It's not something we talked about in school growing up. It's not something we talked about in our circle of friends or family. And it was a really dark time. I just didn't know what to do about it. So I did manage to seek professional help for it. And I got on medication for it, which I grappled with for a long time too. But I also had a friend that was like, you know what? I take anxiety medication every day, and it's just like how my ankles are a part of me. You know, I have to take a little bit of medicine every day to make me feel better, but I'm going to be a better person because of it. And that's okay. So I think after like doing that, my anxiety was for the most part in check for a number of years until I, started going through all these changes. And it's one of those things where like, if you don't have tools in the toolbox to deal with the situation, you're not going to know what to do about it. I can tell you about all these situations that I was in. Like we had this really bad storm in the Boundary Waters and like never been through that before. So yeah, here's a panic attack, right? And then you learn how to deal with it. So the next time that it happens, it doesn't happen again, right? Because you have those experiences. But it's like first assuring yourself and stopping yourself before you go down the rabbit hole and saying like, okay, stop. I can handle this. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? It's going to be okay. But I still find myself in situations in my life that are new to me. Like when I had Josh. And I told you earlier that Josh was just an easy baby. And right, like second kid, cool. I knew what I was doing. I've been through the newborn stuff before. I've never had such extreme anxiety in my life. Like worse than even when it started. Because my older son was such a wild card. And he would start throwing temper tantrums at every little thing. Like I couldn't even tell what his trigger was, because it was if you like moved his sock to the other side of the drawer, he would lose it. And if you put the fork on the wrong side of the plate, or if you were holding Josh for too long, it was like game over. And so that brought back a lot of anxiety. And then when Josh ended up in the hospital with meningitis, that was another time where I just felt like my life was spinning out of control again. But here's what you do. You advocate for yourself. You talk to people about it. You call your doctor. You get help. And I feel a lot better now. And postpartum anxiety, by the way, it's a real thing.
Oh yeah?
It's a real thing. Yeah. But I think like, had I not been in the position to know that there's people around me that supported me and getting help, I probably would still be in that spot of just crippling anxiety, not enjoying my life, not enjoying my kids. So, I mean, I think everyone probably to some degree has a little bit of anxiety. And everyone I think kind of handles it differently. But it doesn't make you a weaker person for having it. I don't wish it upon anyone, but there's definitely things out there that you can do to help make you feel better.
Thank you for sharing that with me, Steph.
Mm-hmm.
One more topic before we get to the being wrong segment is, you mentioned earlier that I think when you began to be a vegetarian and now you're a vegan, I think back to, it was around the time, I think it was in my house in Rochester. So a couple years after the stairs incident.
That's how we mark our time now.
Yeah, I think so.
There's BS and
maybe I was at your place, or maybe you came over to my place and we made a meal. Maybe I made it. I don't know, but we made, it was like a vegetarian, maybe it was vegan meal. It was like the first time it was ever like, that was the focus. And at that time, to eat a meal that had no meat was very strange, and it seemed kind of weird to me, and I wasn't into it.
I know you weren't.
And now this is a decade about later, I think probably the only thing keeping me from being a vegetarian or potentially a vegan is my habits and my normal day-to-day life. I cut back on it certainly, but I don't see it quite changing yet. But let's just say, for instance, you and Dave and the kids had to take me in here. And I say, if I lived in this household, I think it'd be easy because everything around me would make it easy. And so I think I'm kind of there, but I'm curious for you, when and why did this begin? And was it a difficult process to get rid of all the animal products from your diet?
So the meal that you and I made, it was a pasta dish with cannellini beans in it. And there was fettuccine. I think there was fettuccine sauce, or not fettuccine sauce, but Alfredo sauce in it or something.
Okay.
So it was a vegetarian dish.
Yep.
But I'm so curious, before I answer that question, did you like, after I left that night, did you just like go crazy on like a chicken leg or something? Or like what happened after I left?
Probably. I think is it didn't, to me, even though I knew we did it on purpose.
Yeah.
It didn't seem logical for there not to be meat somewhere in this pasta dish. It's just like, why would there not be?
So like, if I would have done that night over, I would have offered you a pasta dish with like tofu and nutritional yeast to like up the protein value and reduce some of the carb value in it. But that's just stuff 10 years later.
I think what I found the most important thing is for it to be spicy. You put the right spices in anything, nothing needs the meat that I thought it used to need. Yeah. But I think a meal is kind of bland to me if it's lacking like the meat of the protein and it just doesn't have the spice. If it's just kind of flavorful, a little bit of flavor and nothing else, to me it's very bland.
Sure. And you, like me, grew up in a meat potato family.
Yes.
Yeah. And so like our spices were salt and pepper. Mm-hmm. And occasionally when Dad would put in like too much chili powder, which actually happened one time. Whoo. But like we weren't crazy on, at least my sister and I weren't, my mom was not crazy on spices. Dad was a little bit more outgoing. But here's the thing that I think about going vegetarian and vegan. It's like going camping without the right tools. If you don't know how to do it properly, you're not going to do it ever again. So if you decide to go camping, I mean,
that's why I go camping with you.
Right. Which we did one time.
Yes.
Yeah. But if you don't have the right tent, if you don't have the fire starter, if you don't, have these things in place, you're going to hate it and you're going to feel like a failure and you're not going to want to do it ever again. And so like we talked about change and how change is really hard, and change from a normal American standard diet was really hard. It wasn't hard getting off meat for me. What was hard was getting off cheese. That was the hardest part. And did you know that they've done studies that eating cheese lights up the same areas in your brain as people that are addicted to certain types of drugs?
No, I did not know this.
And so this is why it's really difficult for people. And like cheese can actually be addiction for some people. And there's more and more science beyond that, but I won't get into it. But getting off cheese was super hard for me. But the thing that has helped, and like, we don't splurge on a lot of like substitutes, I guess you could say. Like we will buy some cheese substitutes occasionally. And over the years, the substitute market for like vegetarian and vegan products has gotten so good. Like it is. If there's any time to be a vegan or a vegetarian, it is today, because just the market is just a mass with all of these substitutes. But we just really focus on a whole food approach, making sure that we have balanced, like the whole foods, like how nature intended it. Your fruits, your vegetables, your legumes, your grains, and then your proteins. We eat a lot of tofu. We eat a lot of beans. We eat a lot of and spices, right? A lot of ethnic foods we enjoyed because naturally they are vegetarian or vegan. So we've greatly expanded our palate in that way too, which I think you should check more out. We'll go check out some Indian and Ethiopian food together sometime.
I'm up for it.
Okay, cool.
I'd imagine a lot of these cultures in the world, if they had enough things growing from the ground that were accessible, then they wouldn't need to go kill some animal to make it part of the meal. I'd imagine though, like in the winter time, especially in those places, that's when you would have to find whatever you could to kill and eat. In a lot of places in the world, that I don't think that's a part of their diet because they don't have to.
Exactly.
And so human beings, yes, we evolved both with plants and animals in our diet, but not everywhere was necessary. And I think for a lot of parts of the world now, we're back in position where we don't need to kill some living thing to have a meal. It's hard when it's kind of hardwired into your upbringing, but you've done it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you're passionate enough about it and you see the benefits.
Yeah.
And what benefits have you seen health-wise? Have you?
Well, I just want to take care of my body. Like my body's a temple to me. I want to feed it good things. I want it to live a long time. I know that there's things that are definitely out of my control. Like I can't, I can't predict what, or try to prevent a disease that I'll get someday, maybe. I don't know. But I like to think that the food choices that I make will kind of put the ball more in my court. I just feel like I have more energy. But it's also, I should point out that it's really easy to also be an unhealthy vegan and vegetarian because like potato chips totally vegan. Oreos, pretty much vegan. So
Pretty much. Okay.
You know, there's some data out on that says maybe not. But anyway, so it's your choice. Like you could certainly live off almond milk and Oreos and potato chips all day long, but you could be a really unhealthy person that way and not have the energy. And right now what matters to me the most is my kids, and I got to keep up with them. And so the food that I eat makes me feel good and gives me the energy. And so that's working. So I'm going to continue that.
Have like your oldest Bryce, he certainly could have eaten meat by now if he wanted to, or you served it to him. Has he eaten any meat, or will he ever eat meat?
This is really funny that you say this. So when was it? Thanksgiving this year. We were having meatballs over at my in-laws' house. And so there was the vegan meatballs and there were the meat meatballs. And I look over at Bryce and he's like reaching over to his cousin's plate and he's picking up a meatball and putting it in his mouth. And part of me, like vegan Steph, wanted to like jump across the table and be like, no, and slap it out of his hand or something like that. But the other Steph was like, I'm just really curious to see, one, is he allergic to it? And two, what's he going to say about it? And so he like took a bite of it, was watching his face. He didn't make any like facial remarks. His like face didn't get blotchy and swell up or anything. And he swallowed it. And so I looked at Dave and I was like, Bryce just ate meat. And he was like, what? And so here's the thing. I think that our kids will be raised vegan, but we want to give them that choice someday when they're 30.
Yeah.
Of, you know,
30. Okay.
now you can make up your mind. No, I think it's totally up to them, right? I want them to have a good life. I want them to understand our values, but I also want them when they're old enough and able enough to make a decision for themselves. Yeah. Then make an educated decision on what you want to do.
Now on to the Being Wrong segment of today's episode. I'm joined here by my friend Steph MacPhail. For those watching on video, Steph, every week on my podcast, People I Know show, I ask my guests something that they were wrong about as you look back in time to say that, yeah, that this past version of myself did this wrong, thought about this wrong. For you, Steph, what were you wrong about?
There's so many things. So when you were asking me this earlier, I honestly didn't know what I was going to say, but then I thought more about it and some of the things that came up in my life. And I alluded to this earlier in our discussion, but it was about being perfect. And I don't know where like this idea or this concept of being perfect or this ideal image of being perfect in my life came from. And so I can't like blame anyone for this, but for whatever reason in my life, everything had to be perfect. My house had to be clean. My hair had to look perfect. I think a lot of that is from TV days, just, having to look like a certain way. But just, like the dishes had to be done before going to bed at night. I had to make sure that my grocery receipt was under a certain amount of money. And that would, if I spent more than that, I went over my budget and I sucked at life and so many like weird things that I just set myself up for failure. So there was just this weird level of perfection that I always held to myself. And it caused a lot of anxiety. And do you know, like when things really started to change were one, when I had kids, especially with the birth of my second child, but after my dog died, that was kind of a turning point for me because I feel like everything was perfect in my life if I had control over it. And so, I had control over how my house could look. I had control over how my day could look. I had control over how I could look. And I had control for the most part over my one son, but he was a baby. So you tell me, but the day my dog died.
And that was unexpected and a few years earlier.
Completely unexpected.
Several years earlier than a dog should have lived.
Right. And it just made me rethink everything. It just knocked every sense of having control in my life out of me. And I think a lot of me literally died that day. And I started to come back as a new person. it was also a really rough time in my life because don't get me wrong, things were great. Had a loving marriage, had a steady job, had a kid, was pregnant with a second kid. But my year at school was really frustrating that year. I had a lot of things working against me. It was a really difficult climate to work in that year at school. I was sick because I was pregnant and I wasn't feeling good. And then, Keller dying on top of it. And like all of this stuff just started unraveling. And I felt like I couldn't control anything anymore. And I felt like my sense of perfection didn't exist anymore. And I didn't know like what, I don't know. Like I just lost kind of all sense of like, what am I trying to do here? What am I trying to do? And so it was really hard to work past. But what I gathered from it was that the fact that my dog could, and this might sound really silly to people that don't have pets, but like Keller was our kid for 7 years before we had kids of our own. And she was babied. And you remember?
I do remember. Keller was always very happy to see me. And I was happy that she was happy to see me. I don't know if I was as happy to see her when she'd jump on me every time.
Yeah, I mean, but she always like got my spot on the bed and she got like the primo spot on the couch and everything. But so I think what I learned from that experience was that I had to start living and stop living up to all of these fake expectations that no one was seeing except for myself. And like my quality of life was just not good because I was just living to these fake expectations. And so I started letting my house get messy more. And I started not caring what my hair looked like. I stopped wearing makeup to school for a while. And my kids were like, Mrs. MacPhail, what's wrong with you? And I was like, nothing, I'm here. Hi. And then I think, when my second kid came around and everyone said that number 2 kid is really difficult and they were right. And then any sense of like perfection and being perfect at anything just went out the window. And I think there's always these ideals that moms in particular hold themselves to. Like they have to be the perfect mom. They have to give their food or their baby only organic food. And they have to make sure their baby has the perfect clothes and the whatever this and this and this and this and this, that the stupid things that we force ourselves into doing. We have to make sure they're only breastfed for the first year of their life, like no formula. Don't even get me started on that.
I won't get you started.
Because that is a hot debate in the mom world. But I think, so the death of Keller and then having kids really forced my perception of what is perfect. That made it change fast. And what matters to me now is 1, that my kids have a good life. And 2, the only way that that's going to happen is if I'm happy about myself. And by getting rid of all of those things and holding myself to these high expectations, I've been able to get there a little bit easier. So who cares what I look like right now?
I was going to ask you that. As I didn't warn you about this video part, and I told you a little bit ago, a previous version of you, would have you been less excited about this? Oh my gosh.
Old Steph would have been like, you can't come over until every single part of my house is clean, until I scrub my toilets, until I get my hair done, until I put some makeup on, until I look halfway decent. This is how I left out of the gym today, just for the record, okay? And old Steph, prior to kids and prior to dog dying would have like totally obsessed about this. But
you warned me that your house was messy or a little messy. I don't know if you've cleaned a little bit since that message, but it looks good to me. I don't know what you're worried about.
And here's the thing, because I feel like we always, and maybe this is just how I was brought up, but I feel like our, houses always have to look in this certain order. And maybe that was just my upbringing. But I feel like every time I get exposed to these new situations, where like you coming over today, where my house was not swept, it wasn't vacuumed. I have dirty dishes in the kitchen right now. Did you see my living room? Did you see it?
It looked great to me. I don't know. I don't care. I think I feel like that if someone comes to my place right now, I'm thinking of it. I'd be ashamed in some ways,
Right.
but I don't know that many people even care. And the people that would come there and expect it to be a certain way and then suddenly think that I'm no longer worthy of like being a friend of them or something because it's not to this sometimes unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
It's like, whatever. Okay, this is the reality of this situation at this time. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. But, or it is to people that they just don't talk about it. That's the thing. It's like, I always say to my friends, like, my house isn't clean right now, but you're welcome to come over. And then like old Steph would just totally beat myself over it. Like, yeah, this house sucks right now. Like, why would what do people think about me? And I think that's just something that stems from my TV years too, is like, what do people think about me? I don't know. But so the more that you're exposed to these little situations of like you coming over today in my house looking like a wreck makes me feel a little bit closer to my goal of being okay with being removed from being perfect. So please come over more often, unannounced. So I'm not forced to, live to this unrealistic expectation.
And I think that plays into this podcast existing and this video right now that we're also recording is when I would think about doing all this stuff, there was this fear, like I wouldn't do it well enough. People wouldn't like it. They wouldn't care. I don't know what I projected on other people. And then I just began to realize that, it doesn't matter. I've got to try something. Let's put it out there. It's probably going to relate to some people. I'd imagine there's some people watching or listening right now that really can relate to this. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's useful to hear it because we need reminders sometimes that we're all human and we all experience different things. But some of the things we experience are kind of similar.
Right.
And we go through it. And I think it's just best to put whatever we have out there if we're trying to improve ourselves, but also maybe use something that we learned in our life to maybe help somebody else. It's good just to kind of put it out there and not worry so much that everyone everywhere is going to think it's perfect like we want it to be. And just know that maybe somewhere someone's going to find this useful and it'll be good that I've done it.
Right. Absolutely. And you wouldn't have known had you not done it. So you do you.
And I think as I continue to do this, I love hearing what people think they were wrong about because we all can look back on our lives and this is a very, very useful one. So thank you, Steph, for joining me today in the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And for anyone watching this video, this is going to be episode 19 of People I Know Show. All the audio of all the episodes is now available on YouTube, as this video will also be on YouTube. But you can listen to all of them there or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many other places. And I've heard people don't know what podcasts are. Some people, which is understandable because we all can't know everything. I forget that I've been into podcasts for a long time and not everybody's been into podcasts for a long time. So if you don't know what a podcast is, that's fine. But I'd like to teach you. And then maybe if one of the podcasts you try listening to is mine, People I Know Show, that would be super as well. So thanks again for everyone involved, those watching and Steph here with me on the show. Thanks, Steph.
Kurt. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to People I Know Show. You can find links in the show notes for the People I Know Show Facebook and Instagram accounts. And please take a few moments to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you might be listening. And if you like the show, or maybe you like me, or maybe you just like helping other people attempt to achieve some goals, please encourage someone new to listen. And share your favorite episode on social media. When people do that, it really tends to help. And finally, feel free to email your feedback directly to me, Kurt Karstensen, by using the email address peopleiknowshow@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.